So speaking of that, this idea, I'm glad you talked about this because this is a pretty good example of an AI generated task that I put together that I don't know much about. And so I've actually been studying it and of course reading the documents that come up. But I just want to walk through this. So somebody on the forums, the community, Claris Community forums asked about a RACI matrix chart. They wanted to be able to generate this in FileMaker some way. And lots of people had ideas. Wim beat me to the punch and said, well, that sounds like a web viewer thing. And so I went to v0.dev and I pretty much just put in the person's question. I said, here's what they did. So this is what it gave me. And I think it's fascinating because it's fun to read through this and understand what's happening. So I want to just kind of talk through it. This is creating, the first thing that it did is it created a class called Racy Matrix. And we'll get into the details about that. And I see this a lot. This is what JavaScript libraries do. It takes the class and it puts it into a variable. And then once that class is in a variable, we can access the functions that are inside of that. I call these libraries, and I don't know if that's the right word, but like the Apex chart library looks like this when we start to use it. I don't see what's under the hood. All I see is const chart equals new Apex charts. But I think so this is a class, and the class contains a bunch of functions that do the work. So that's what I wanted to explore and just try to understand this better, because I don't know how I would use it. I don't think I needed the class to do this, but I like its organization. And so I've been
Oh,
exploring classes more.
Jeremy,
Yes.
inside the class
Yeah,
is
well,
add task and assign. Those are custom functions inside the class.
yes, yeah, we'll get to that. I wanted to look at it. So,
Methods.
huh?
Methods.
Yeah, I was wondering, are they methods
Methods.
actually, property of methods on a class, right? And
So
the
let's look
class
at
may
it.
exist in a library.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's look, and I advocate for that all the time. I say the Apex charts has a method called append series, and we can call that as FileMaker developers from FileMaker using a FileMaker script. But I never have looked at under the hood what those are. But I want to look at this because it's pretty simple. So inside of this class is a constructor, which is not something we call, but I think it's used for organization. It's used for
It
It
calls
looks almost like
time.
like a TypeScript thing where it's defining.
Yeah, it starts. That's what it calls first. Anytime a
yes.
constructor is anytime you have a constructor, it calls that function first thing to set up the environment for whatever. So that's where you put things that you need to have there for the rest of the stuff to use.
Okay. So it does have
Because
four methods, which we
the
looked at.
the way to think about a class is it's just a special type of object. So it has
Just a special type of
it's a
object.
thing that has parameters and that have the subparameters, and it has a few special ones like the constructor and then the ability to do an extend and stuff like that.
Okay. So it has a method called add task. It takes in a task as the parameter, and that's what's used down here. So we're tapping into the variable and we're tapping into that method and we're passing it this. And all that does, it seems to, is it takes the tasks and it pushes it into this array. And then it takes that whole task. Oh, and then it adds to the matrix. The task is the property name and then an empty object. So this task will have multiple properties. But as we run through this, it's going to add a task and run this function every time. Then it adds a role. I'm not sure where the role is. I don't see the role here being used. So we'll see if that's elsewhere. Oh, here it is. Okay.
Well, assign takes a role as the second parameter, doesn't it?
Yeah. So assign takes the task name, so it has to match one of these that are up here. It takes a role, and then it takes the letter that goes into the so here's the assign method. It takes the task, it takes the role and responsibility. So it throws an error if that task doesn't exist. That's great. So it looks like I can't assign I can't do line 113 before I've added this task. And that makes sense. We don't want to assign
But
a
you
response.
can assign roles on the fly. Look
Yeah.
at line 21. It'll let you assign roles on the fly. You put in
Yes.
project manager, it calls that add role to role. If this
Which is
role has
interesting.
role, yeah,
Which
it
is
doesn't
interesting.
have
I don't
role.
know if that's optimized or if it's something that would be like, I should add the roles first, add the tasks, add the roles. I don't know.
Yeah, I doubt it
So,
matters. I think they were just drying up their code. They probably had it that way, and then there's like, I can just assign the roles and have a guy put in the 3 parameters instead of 2. I don't
so
know.
when it does the assign method, eventually it's going to add to the matrix, to the task that's existing that comes in, to the role, the responsibility. So the responsibility is one of the letters, RACI. So we're building a matrix. We're building a matrix which is the JSON or the object representation of this table, right? And then the last one, which I find so fascinating because this is what data tables does. This is what the chart does. It just generates some HTML. So it's generating some styling, which is interesting. And it's generating a table. It's got the head here and it's got the task. And then it starts to, inside of the head tag, it starts to look at the roles and just plot those out. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it creates some more HTML. It closes that. And then it starts working on the table here. And so then it takes all of the roles array from the roles array and then grabs the mate. This is fascinating to me, is that it's just HTML divs being written based on the tasks and so forth. So, and then you return the HTML. So you do all that work, and then you simply call the function to HTML. And because all of this data has been placed inside the class, is that the right word? Is that the right word? Added to the class? Yeah.
It's not placed inside the class. It's placed inside the instance of the class.
Yeah,
So racy
correct.
is a
Right.
variable which is an instance of the class, which defines how the class behaves. And then you could have racy2 where you have another bunch of data. So it then renders the data from within the racy object, if that makes sense.
Racy. So I could say racy2.
I've always heard it called racy. I don't know if that's the.
Yeah, I don't know. And then we'll do.
You'd have to do racy2. Yeah, you done? Yeah, racy2 because a new matrix. Yeah.
And then we'll just do some.
So that's kind of the whole thing about a class is you define here's a structure and here's how I want it to behave, and now I take which doesn't get called. It's not like a function or an anonymous function gets called automatically. A class you have to then call an instance of the class, and what you might do is some of the cool stuff you can do with classes is you can make a subclass. So you can have like a race. It might be a racy, and you might have a racy dot this department or this department where it takes the same functions that this parent one has, and then you say this one also has these other attributes, so you can then inherit from the parent class and extend it. So you
okay. So this is fascinating to me to see what this is doing. I mean, this is what we do with the Apex charts every day. We simply say Apex charts or chart dot. What is it? Chart dot. What was it? What is it? Let's see. Here's my chart. There it is. So we have the same pattern up here. Where is it? Where is it? Bottom of my options. Oh, it's really just at the bottom because it's actually really simple.
And object-oriented programming is definitely something that people should look into and understand for using these kind of things.
So here, yeah. Is object-oriented program specifically specific to classes? Is that what you're
classes and objects like that, so you can extend take something like that and you can expand it and replace some of the functions, make them more what you want or whatever. So you can take a library and then you can make an instance of it and expand it and change it without having to dig into their code
Yeah.
to do it. So like that. So
Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of where you say, right, we have a class that's person, and a person can be a student or a teacher. So a person has a first name, last name. A teacher has a classes that they do, and then the teacher inherits, it shares some of the attributes from the class, and the student inherits some attributes from the class, and then you can have a part-time student which then has some other attributes, so they all inherit properties, which
and
is
they can all have the methods for like add
New class,
or
take a class, drop a class,
yeah,
exactly. Teach a class.
yeah, like update first name. So you can then call like tutor.update first name, and it takes the name. So every object that's inherited from a person has that. But then you might say teaching classes is only available on there, and you can also then there's a whole lot of cool stuff you can do, like object overloading and all sorts of other bits and pieces, which is where most scripting languages like JavaScript and Python and other bits and pieces like that are the class structure is one of the kind of key ways in which you build complex applications without having to have lots of logic in different places. There's not really an equivalent to it in FileMaker because FileMaker isn't really object driven. So it's
So
Although it may be in its own design what it's using in the background, but
C libraries that we're written on will be object oriented. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
this is
A button will be an instance of a UI controller, which will be an instance of an NS view on the Mac and a whatever Windows thing over there. It will definitely will be under the hood.
it's a fascinating way to work with data. Now, I saw Sam say we should probably loop through these. I agree. What I would prefer to do is just give this class an array of the tasks. I don't know if I could do this in the assignments and then just let it do it all.
You make a new function that says add task array, which accepts an array.
Right.
That function then loops over it and creates a task for every item in the array. So then we just pass in an array of them. So we can have add a single task function, which takes a string, or we have a group of tasks, or add an array of tasks, which receives an array. And
then even do a click handler that cycles through the cells. So when you click on it, it goes from blank to R to A to C to I back.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
that would be inside the class. So it would be click handler, right? Is that what you're saying?
You'd probably call it, you'd probably abstract the click. The event handler is the click handler. The method would be, toggle, whatever it's called, toggle role responsibility, plus or whatever, minus or whatever, and hold down shift to go backwards and whatever.
That's a good point. So, okay, interesting.
So when it comes to object orientation, you realize that naming things is really important.
Now,
that's a hard lesson learned right there.
Let me ask you
that's where OpenAI ChatGPT is brilliant to say, can you rename all these names of these things to be something sensible? And it kind of goes, that should be this, and that should be this, and those coding standards is it's like we shouldn't be calling things data. It's like, well, it's quite vague. It doesn't necessarily say what it is.
I got a guy
like just JSON. This string is just called JSON. It's like, well, what is it?
I have a guy I work with that he's constantly naming things in his let variables like T1, T2, F1, F2. Oh my God. Dude, why don't you just name all your variables by as UUIDs? Are you trying to get job security?
Yeah, right. T1, T2, And it turns out T stands for data field. It doesn't even something beginning with T.
Table and field is and different things like that, but it's just T. But it's and he says, well, you can look up. If it's T23, you can find T23 easily, and you know what it is. I said, yeah, but if you name it right, you don't have to.
You don't need to look up.
Anyway,
that's why you say my code is self-documenting.
let's
If
let's
you use the index, right?
Yeah, I think the way to think about an object is probably it's a bit like an API where it will have a method that you can call, and a method will take, like create a record, and that takes these parameters, which is kind of what that application programming interface is. It's just a way to describe a set of functions. The really powerful stuff with the classes is that concept of this, where the scope of that data that you're passing is contained to the instantiation of that object, not the, data one, data two, data three. It's like this object, everything within there refers to itself. So you then don't have to, as you walk up and down those classes.
Have ChatGPT explain it to you, because it's a rabbit hole for sure, but once you get the basic concepts, you can follow
And
it.
some people are sorry about classes, like they never really lived up to what we thought they were going to be, object-oriented programming, because it started back in 90 or 92. And the buzzwords were encapsulation, and which is what Gabriel was describing there, and then inheritance. And it's very difficult to do consistently. This is great. This is a very good use for it. And the Ruby language that Japanese fellow wrote, I forget his name now, it is completely an object-oriented language. Everything's an object, even add. Even like if you go 5 times 6, the times is an object. And it yields 30. And so everything is written backwards with dot notation. That's probably one of the biggest projects of just complete inheritance object oriented in a language. I mean, every language has it, but that one is more
It
object
was kind
oriented.
of when they were like, object-oriented programming is going to take over the world. Everything should be an object. And you read some object-oriented code, and it's just there's your 19 nested levels deep, and you have no idea what any of these things are, because you think, I'm going to every single thing I do, I'm going to abstract this into a generic method that can be used anywhere, and then
exactly. And prior to that, it was all line after line after line, and we would start at the top, finish at the bottom, and we would call a function and then return and come to that line, and then call a function and then return and go to the next line. And the objects were supposed to, like having listeners and like having, operating systems, Windows and Mac, the objects were supposed to take us away from that, but really, it's never really worked. Like you said, we got rid of one monster, we created another monster.
So the idea of classes is interesting. I completely skipped over it when I was learning some JavaScript, because we don't need it to work. We don't need them. We don't need to understand them to work in FileMaker. We can call classes. We can interact with them. And that's what we're doing with Apex charts or data tables, or I think the convention is right. Any class starts with an uppercase letter. Is that right? So data tables, Apex charts, C3 are all uppercase. That's
React
a class
component.
Well, it would be in React.
Does it have to be? I think it has to be uppercase, doesn't it?
Does it have to be in order to work? Like, order to be?
I'm not 100% sure about that.
I think it's a naming convention, and I don't think
it's just a convention, is it? Yeah.
No. So, anyway, it was fun to play with that. I like that idea, and I'm intrigued by it. When Josh Willing wrote his FM Gopher, he created a library that is a class. That's kind of what I'm interested in doing. Is I would take this and turn it into something that I could download. That I could npm install. That becomes a library. So
so
anyway, you could take that racy matrix class, just take the word racy off and turn it into matrix, and it works as a really nice matrix builder. Take out the, leave the role in there and leave the other parts in there, and you can, and then put a few little bells and whistles on it, and you could generate a matrix really quickly. We have so many of those in different libraries that may be not so cool, but if you had a specific use for it, or a matrix like the racy matrix, that's why they took the matrix builder and added racy to it, and added the third element. You can do that with any, right? You can build your own class, share it with all of us.
And the same thing is like, just like we were just working on doing there with adding the click head and stuff like that. you can do something like that real quick where all you're sending it is two arrays. One is the columns, one is the rows, and then let the user fill in the responsibility, so you're saying, hey, go here and tell me who's responsible for what if we're starting this project, as to saying these are the people who need to be informed as this goes, these are people who are responsible for these things, and I mean it's a pretty nice, thing to be able to, and then lock it, and then those click handlers don't work anymore.
Cool.
So
I think it definitely
Well,
helps.
Gabe and
Go ahead,
then Marcus.
Go, Marcus.
Gabe,
I
you
was
go
just going to
first.
say it speaks to what Doug was saying in terms of the idea of a microservice. You could also just define an object and create an npm for it, and it's not a microservice, but it's that same idea, right? Where you got your base code, and now you can use it again and again and again, which I love that idea.
Great.
I think it's a good way to write your own library so you can for a web view so you can reuse them, because it's a bit easier
Yeah.
to structure validating the data and the requests that come in and then what happens to it. And when you've made one of those, like you say, a matrix that it has a table and you can edit it, that could be useful in a number of different ways. And by writing it as an object, and you define your initial properties and you pass in an array of options that would be, well, this field must be, and then you give it an array of, it must be A, B, C, or D. This thing must be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So every time you're using it, you're passing that in as config data, which is the reason why so many JavaScript libraries, they take their instantiators are, what HTML element do you want me to act on? And then everything else is a big array with all sorts of options that can be, nested, arrays of stuff, because that's the standard, that's the convention that we're used to for using JavaScript libraries, is on what do you want to do it, and then what options do you want to have. And most libraries are then resilient in that if you don't specify an option, you have some default does, data tables or Apex charts. If you don't specify anything, it gives you something, and then it's like, right, now have this option. So all those things that come in, you just then say, right, now I want to change that. And I think if we write our JavaScript code like that, or we encourage ChatGTP or whatever to write them for that in that way, it does then make it easier. It's, in a way, it's less code to maintain. It's more work to get it set up initially, but it means that code is more reusable across different use cases.
Very cool. Well, we don't need classes to work in FileMaker, in JavaScript and FileMaker. I've never used them. I've never built one. I think I use them all the time.